partly for oil trade with Russia. How should India deal with US and how should India's central bank navigate these choppy waters? Joining me now is a very special guest, JEAN-CLAUDE Trichet, who was the head of the European Central Bank from 2004 to 2011. Before that, he was the governor of the French Central Bank for more than a decade and is a globally renowned economist. Mr. Trichet, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you your view on India, especially after hearing the RBI governor, also the finance minister in India. How do you see India at a time of global volatility and instability?
First of all, I am very happy to be interviewed by you personally. I would say that all what I hear here is from the governor of the central bank and from the minister of finance is reassuring, if I may, in the present dramatic circumstances, which are the rule for all presently, with the geopolitical tensions everywhere, with all the difficulty associated with the tariffs and the change of attitude of the US executive branch. It seems to me that the solidity of India is very much confirmed by all the figures we have and by even the revision up of some of the figures, including growth recently. So I remain quite confident in the capacity of India to surmount those major difficulties, including, of course, the complex relationship with the United States of America. So I would say a lot of challenges, a lot of difficult, I would say, episodes to cope with, but resilience and solidity of the society and of the economy.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the kind of impact the US tariffs are having on global growth. Your outlook for the European economy, and how do you think this uncertainty around tariffs is impacting the growth of the European Union?
First of all, I would confirm that this dramatic change in the overall attitude of one very important country, obviously, in comparison with the previous rule-based approach that was the consensus, has been the consensus for a very long period of time. Of course, this has an impact on growth, which is negative. Negative in the US, by the way, and negative for all partners of the global economy. It's clear that, particularly in the US, of course, these tariffs have a negative impact on growth and also an impact on inflation. So it's difficult to measure that very completely and comprehensively right now, but the consensus of economists is very clear on that. You know, it's not good for the US economy, to the extent that the US economy has itself an influence, a big influence on the rest of the world. It's not good for the global growth. And when you look at the various previous, I would say, projections, you see that they incorporated this element. I was very struck myself to see that when the international financial institutions reviewed their projection, the revision down of the global economy and of many economies in the world was absolutely clear after it was clear that the US executive branch was embarking on this kind of liberation. By the way, as you remember, it was so dramatically negative that then we had the pause. But all this together is, again, in my opinion, negative. And we will see exactly what are the new projections, because, as you know, we are a few half days before the IMF in particular will display its new projections. So, again, we will see. I don't want to be too definitive. We are waiting for these projections, but all taken into account, it's not good. And that is my summing up of the situation.
Right. Could you give us a sense of some of the challenges that you foresee for economies like India? You painted a a bright picture for the Indian economy, saying that India is solid and with resilience it will be able to surmount the challenges. But some of the key headwinds you expect for the Indian economy in the months to come?
Well, first of all, of course, India plays now a very important role in the global economy. I'm struck when I look at all the projections that it becomes the big economy that is growing very rapidly in comparison with all other. That's new. I mean, we have known a period where India was less bright as regards I would say, growth projections. So that being said, of course, India has a lot of challenges, enormous challenges, which were underlined by the governor of the central bank and by the minister. They are very confident, as I said, and it seems to me that figures are proving that they can be confident. But again, they have a lot of I would say, standard of living to increase. They have a lot of education to continue to operate. They have a lot of jobs to create, and the challenges of India are really gigantic. That being said, when you are in a country which was supposed to grow at 6.5%, but after reviewing the situation, they say, but finally for 25, 26, it would be 6.8%, despite the environment, which is not positive, as we already said. This means something. And I'm particularly impressed by the fact that the quality of human resource in India is remarkable. The engineers are remarkable. There is a very solid tradition, I would say a secular tradition of math, and it, of course, is extraordinarily effective in terms of high quality services. I know that a lot of European firms are very happy with the brains that are member of that firm, global firm, and are located in India because they have, again, the quality of the human resource and very good education in the domain of science and technology.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the challenges and some of the points that central banks around the world will have to consider. Even if we arrive at certain trade deals with the United States, which brings some amount of stability and certainty, what are some of the challenges that will confront central banks, including the Indian central bank, in the months and the next few years of the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, to the extent that part of the US administration is inflation creating, because, as I said, of the tariff themselves, because of other measures that are taken in the United States of America and will probably continue to augment the threat of inflation in America. As you know, there is still inflation, despite all the good measures, in my opinion, that were taken by the Federal Reserve. We still have a level of inflation which is around 1% higher in the US in comparison with Europe, when the two central banks were in parallel doing, in my opinion, what was necessary. So again, back to India. Global inflation might be more demanding, which is, of course, challenging for the central bank. The central bank did very well, in my opinion, in running its inflation targeting, flexible inflation targeting. It was, really a success. If my memory is exact, it was introduced, clarified, and crystallized in the 2016, and we are living now with this, rule, which seems to me to work very well. But again, the challenges are considerable, and of course, everything depends very much, for, I would say, all of us, of the fact or not that the Central Bank of the US, the Federal Reserve, remains independent. There is a will of President Trump, of course, to diminish the level of independence or even eliminate independence and put other people in the open market committee to do whatever he wants, that would be totally catastrophic. But the market will not trust that then you can count on a solid anchoring of expectations. And in my opinion, solid anchoring expectations is a necessary condition for being in the best of the world possible.
Mr. Trichet, when it comes to moving away from this tariff situation, we've seen an impact of these tariffs on the US labor market. At what point do you think Donald Trump may start easing up some of these tariff policies?
My sentiment is that we have to observe what he did in the past. You might remember that only 7 days after the famous Liberation Day, where he was pre-announcing enormous augmentation of tariffs, he changed his position only 7 days after, and he said, no, now it's the pause, which is extremely rare. When you have a head of state, the chief of a very, very important government, engaging in a certain direction, he does not change only 7 days afterwards. Why did he change? He changed because he observed first that what he had said had a very negative impact on the stocks and shares in the US, had a negative impact, incredibly high negative impact on the interest rates on the treasuries, and to the extent that there was also a call by some of his advisors to diminish the value of the dollar, there was also a problem with the dollar. And altogether, it was the foreigners that were withdrawing from the US. And that was a real catastrophe, particularly as regards the market interest rates, because of the treasuries that were sold by the foreigners. So he decided, he was correctly advised, in my opinion, and he decided immediately to say, no, we stop, it's the pause. So if the market here, in my opinion, he might change his opinion. He depends very much on the market from that standpoint.
Right. So at the end of the day, we'll have to see how the stock markets perform. I would also like to ask you about how central banks should treat cryptocurrencies going forward, and what do you really make of central banks launching digital currencies themselves?
First of all, I think that technology is technology. I already mentioned the very high quality of technology in India. We have to take advantage of the progress that we are making in this domain, first. Second, we have to be very careful, because at the very beginning, we were not making the difference between a so-called cryptocurrency and a so-called crypto speculative asset. And personally, I would have preferred that the difference would be made much more clearly. You have crypto active that are speculative, and that's not good in general, in my opinion. We don't need a new casino table around the vast, I would say, financial market constellation of various tables. So that seems to me bad. Now, of course, you have the stable coins that are pushed by the US administration and are, of course, very, very important in the eyes of the private sector and in the eyes of those who are promoting that. And again, the executive branch in the US looks like being promoting these stable coins. So to the extent that it would be a loss for the central banks, because the central banks at the present moment are the central bank, the institution that are issuing I would say, currency, that are real currency, defended by the central bank and stable by definition, because they are in the hands of the central bank. So I can understand that a lot of central banks envisage to issue themselves not only their traditional currency, say the notes to oversimplify,
Right.
but also crypto notes, if I may, which would be the equivalent
Right.
of notes. So we will see what happens
Okay.
and who wins, if I may, in this battle.
All right. Mr. Trichet, I would also like to ask you about the gold prices, the gains we've seen globally. What do you think is fueling these gains, and what would be your outlook on gold prices going forward?
In my opinion, it's the illustration of the fact that in the present world, in the present, I would say, global economy situation, uncertainty is of the essence. And when uncertainty is of the essence, then a lot of investors and savers have the tendency to give a privilege to gold. Historically, gold was, of course, from that standpoint, an investment which is itself, by the way, a speculative investment, but which proved it was very effective.
Just to come back to the issue of India once again. Now, India is aiming to become a developed nation by 2047. We're looking at 8% growth annually on a sustained basis. What more do you think India needs to do to achieve that goal, that sustained growth of 8%?
Hello?
Yeah, Mr. Trichet, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I'm sorry, I don't know what happens. We were cut off.
All right. So, sir, I'm trying to ask you about what India needs to do to achieve an 8% annual growth rate on a sustained basis, because that would be important for India to become a developed nation by 2047.
Well, again, India is extremely ambitious, and the past is very impressive, by the way. As I said, when you are at the level of 6.8%, namely quasi 7% of growth, you are not that far from 8%. We will see. I think it's good that a country like India puts itself in the situation of being extremely ambitious and extremely bold. And after all, other countries, not necessarily far away from India in the past, have had also episodes of very rapid growth. But of course, it does not suffice to say, I want to do that. You have also to take all the appropriate decisions to reach that goal. And amongst these appropriate decisions, of course, you certainly have pursuing structural reforms to facilitate as much as possible a satisfactory growth, a growth that would be exactly in line with this ambition. I tend to be confident personally because all what I see in India seems to reinforce the sentiment that it is a real goal. And after all, the standard of living of the citizens of India are also calling for relatively rapid growth in the years to come to catch up with taking into account, as I said, the quality of the human resource in India. So I am reasonably confident, but India should not be complacent. It's a very ambitious goal, and it calls for very ambitious reform.
Right. So very important structural reforms, no place for complacency, work towards your ambitions. Thank you very much, Jean-Claude Trichet, for joining us here on the program, giving us your view on how you see India right now and what impact the US tariffs will have on the global economy, and at what point you think Donald Trump will pull back. We're taking a short break here on Global Eye, but don't go anywhere. We speak to Euro Intelligence Director Wolfgang Monchau when we return.